procurement systems and practices for technology acquisitions and indigenization. The eminent panelists for the session are Lieutenant General A.V. Subramaniam, VSM. An alumnus of IMA Dehradun, General Subramaniam was commissioned into the core of EMA in 1974 after his graduation in physics from Vivekanand College, Chennai. As directing staff of College of Defence Management, he provided inputs for the formulation of DPP 2002. He was appointed as Director General, Weapons and Equipment in June 2012. He has been engaged in evolving the provisions of DPP 2013 as also operating the procedure. Mr. A.K. Gupta, Additional Secretary, Department of Defence Production. After a varied career as a civil servant spanning more than 3 decades, Mr. Ashok Kumar Gupta assumed the responsibility of Additional Secretary and Chief Vigilance Officer in the Department of Defence Production in January 2012. He joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1981 and served in various executive and policy-making levels in the State Government of Tamil Nadu and Government of India. In Government of India, he has worked as Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Health, Senior Directing Staff in National Defence College, and Joint Secretary in Department of Defence. Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya. Dr. Bhattacharya, as we all know, is President, Centre for Digital Economy Policy Research. To chair the session, we have with us Lieutenant General S.P. Kochar, AVSM, SM, VSM. General Kochar is former Signal Officer-in-Chief and Senior Colonel Commandant. He has held several important posts in his 38-year career. As an Additional Director General of Personnel Services at Army Headquarters, he headed the Tri-Services Anomalies Resolution Committee to address anomalies of the 6th Central Pay Commission. The General Officer holds 2 MPhil degrees and is an MTech from the Indian Institute of Technology and has undergone several in-service professional courses, including the National Defence College course and the Army's Higher Command course. General Kochar will also be speaking in the seminar. He will be speaking on procurement challenges and remedies. Over to the chair.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As it happens, post-lunch session is sparsely populated, but thankfully populated with the serious guys. In the morning session, it was strategy that was being discussed, policies that were being discussed, but what flowed was that we had very eminent speakers and very eminent comments from the audience. What stood out was that while in their own right, each one of the panelists was eminently qualified and speaking very well on the subject. When you look at each context, you will find there are glaring gaps between the perception of a uniformed, ex-uniformed person, then ex-administrator and ex-finance guy. Now this carries on into the actual service level also, and I think that is the bane of the problem that we are facing today. If these chairs can be bridged and each does a little bit of give and take, and we come to concluding remarks where we can take the bandwagon together, then we are set to achieve what we have set out for. But the good part was that each one of them accepted the idea of technical sovereignty. And they spoke about the strategy as to how it can be implemented, how the model that has been suggested can be tweaked to meet the environmental realities. Now in this session, we have with us eminent people who are actually dealing with procurements. And without whose insight, it will be very difficult to change anything that we want to do. And to usher in technical sovereignty, they play a very major role. We have people from, we have a speaker, Mr. A.K. Gupta from the ministry, who is handling it at the policy level and as well as at the functional level. We have General Subramaniam, who controls acquisitions from the Army side and who has a deep insight into how acquisitions and the related subjects are proceeding and how they can be tweaked. Then of course Jayjeet Bhattacharya has been associated with this movement since last year, and he has an overarching view of what the whole gamut is about today and what it is expected to be in the years to come. So without wasting any time, let's hear what they have to say, and thereafter draw our own conclusion and see how to take, how to keep the ball rolling. I would request Mr. Gupta to start the session with his remarks.
Everybody's having a spectacle. So that is why we thought here they can share, listen to counterpoint, counter.
Good afternoon. I have been given a task to speak as on offset as facilitator to technology acquisition. This vision I have taken from DRDO. It's a DRDO vision says to make India prosperous by establishing a world-class science and technology base. The key word is world-class science and technology base. See, these are some of the advantages I have listed for acquiring critical technology. If we want to make India a world-class science and technology base, then we need to own technology. Either we can acquire or we develop ourselves. To have a head start in this direction, probably we can acquire critical technologies in the beginning and then can develop our own platforms. So this acquisition enables us to design, develop and produce complex defense platforms, and it leads to capability and capacity build-up, leading to development of new technologies. It enables indigenous industries to handle subsequent product upgrades, enables integration of Indian industry in the global supply chain, and it has got tremendous spin-off benefits in synergistic sectors. Because of prominence of importance of technology in the entire scenario, it has been given a prominent place in the offset defense offset guidelines. And for the first time in August 2012, we have come out with the objectives which we want to achieve through offset guidelines. And these three objectives have been listed, and if you see the second one, it says augmenting capacity for research, design and development related to defense products and services. So emphasis again here is on our own research, design and development. How do we achieve that? Through offset obligations. So far we have signed 20 contracts in our Ministry of Defense, and offset obligation to the tune of $4.25 billion has been accrued. It is expected to grow in times to come to $8 to $10 billion. As we know that India is one of the largest arms importers in the world, and it is expected to grow. So how do we leverage? How do we leverage our huge acquisition? It is through offset guidelines, and that is why the provisions of offsets are there in our acquisition procedure. There are two provisions in the existing guidelines. One is, it states investment through transfer of technology to the Indian enterprises. They includes DPSUs and OFB also. And here discharge is given to the extent of the value of transfer of technology. And second stipulates provision for transfer of technology to the government institutions. These are the provisions under which DOT can be given and discharge credits can be taken. And in case we take under 3.1c, then there is a multiplier also to the extent of 1.1. I am just describing the existing provisions. What are the various issues? We will come to the issues later on. There is another area of critical technology acquisition. We have given a list of critical technologies in our defense offset guidelines where huge multipliers have been given. It is 2 for the exclusive use of armed forces, 2.5 for the entire Indian market. And as it becomes less and less constraining, then the multiplier goes up. Now this is important. So far we have not received any high-end technology under any of these provisions. There was one proposal received for critical technology, and that too because of the cost was exorbitantly high, it was not agreed to. So this shows that there is some problem somewhere in our defense guidelines. Either we are not being able to clearly specify what do we want, we have not been able to define the range and depth, we have not been able to do proper costing. Maybe these technologies, they are either denied or controlled through various control regimes like MTCR or EAR or ITAR. Maybe the industry is willing, but somehow they are prevented from their own governments to transfer technology. So there are a host of issues which we may have to increase our incentivization for these transfers of technology. Now, this problem is going to accentuate in times to come, because in DPP 2013, if you see, we have now got a hierarchy of categorization. We have started with a Buy Indian, and that is the most preferred category. If something can be purchased indigenously, then we need not go outside. And so, if we have to reach the Buy Global category, then we have to discard all other options: Buy Indian, Buy and Make Indian, Make Indian, and then Buy and Make with TOT. So these four options need to be discarded. So the emphasis now is on purchasing from the indigenous or Indian industries. We are getting a number of requests for issue of licenses. So far 204 licenses have been issued, out of which 41 have been operationalized also. And this request is going to grow up. Then connected issues with this are security architecture for the licensed companies. I was interacting with a few delegations from outside countries. They were telling, okay, your request for now transfer of technology will grow up. But what happens if you basically assimilate those technologies, upgrade those technologies, make your own platforms, export those platforms, and it becomes they use the word co-mingled technology. How do we safeguard our own technology? Okay, we are perfectly comfortable to share technology with India, but how do we know that ultimately when you export and it doesn't go to our adversary? And similarly, they were asking about exports. Exports is minuscule now, so far as India is concerned. And if this exports also is going to grow up. So when we export items, what type of mechanism we have got for the end-use verification? We take end-use certificate from the company, from the government, countersigned by the government. But ultimately, do we have got any system or mechanism where physically we verify that ultimately it has been put to the proper use? So these are the issues about security architecture. Yes, DPSUs, we have got our own OFBs, we have got a proper security architecture. But for the private sector, we don't have. So we are developing a security manual, and which will be made mandatory for all the licensed defense companies. Till that time, again, security of technology is an issue. It is now done on one-to-one basis whenever technology is required. Exports also, we need to tweak procedures. SOP has to be made so that we are very sure that there is a proper verification of the end use. So these are the connected issues with the transfer of technology. Now, what is the way ahead? Can we think of? We are now thinking of modifying the offset guidelines. We are receiving suggestions from the various quarters, and one way can be that we make it mandatory in the RFP itself, the transfer of technology. This transfer of technology has directed offsets. This transfer of technology can be related to that platform, or it can be unrelated also. But the flip side of this is that suppose they are not willing to part with the technology, to that extent that offer will become non-compliant and liable to be rejected. So our vendor base gets narrowed down, and competition to that extent gets affected, and our acquisition cost may go up. So in all the cases we may not be able to resort to this type of provision, but there may be certain cases, very good cases, where we are very sure that we are going to get very good response. Maybe in those RFPs we can put a clause that we want this technology, so it becomes mandatory, and that becomes a qualifying criteria for acceptance of the bid. So we have to be very case specific. But again, this issue needs deliberations. Similarly, critical technology also, listing out one line or giving a small paragraph may not be enough, because nobody knows what do we want. So we need to define it in greater detail, and maybe we can do some costing also, so that when they apply, they know what we are talking and what they are offering. So these are the issues probably we can throw up for discussion in this forum also, and I'll be happy to receive suggestions that how do we make our offset guidelines more conducive for acquisition of technology. How do we come out of this controlled or denial regime and acquire critical technologies. We have got multiplicity of platforms. We acquire one technology. So far we have been operating as licensed production entities. We make platform, and later on, we need upgraded platform, we again acquire technology, and then we keep on acquiring and we keep on producing platforms. So idea is ultimately we should be able to have our own platforms, and we should be able to upgrade them in times to come. Should we have multiplicity of platforms? Can we stick to one platform and keep upgrading? So these are the issues I think in the long run we have to address, and how they can be addressed, and what type of incentives or multipliers can be given in our offset guidelines, so that our country becomes truly the world-class science and technology base. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. That was a good expose on how offsets work. Ladies and gentlemen, the point to note is that the intentions with which offsets have been put into the DPP are very noble. But when we talk outside this forum, when we talk over a cup of tea, the way offsets are being implemented is not what was desired in the DPP. So maybe there is a case, and maybe speakers coming in after this will bring out as to what is the vein of the implementation of a very well-meant policy. On ground, where does the problem arise? Why is it that the Indian industry is dealing with the offsets and not being implemented in the right letter and spirit? With that, I invite Jan Subramaniam to come up and deliver his talk.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you very much to Jan Thurukutoj for having asked me to be present here. Thanks to JG also for having put up a kind of a topic like technological sovereignty, about which we have been concerned with for quite some period of time. We needed phrases like this in our vocabulary. Sovereignty, though it may sound a little largish or to this, technological security may be a kind of a grappling, people can grapple with an issue like that. That then we can go towards a technological sovereignty, a very relevant kind of a topic for an emerging nation like ours that we need to be discussing. That on that larger framework, I have been asked to actually talk about some of the edge-related issues of this. Aligning defense procurement procedure for technology acquisition and indigenization. So it is absolutely at the executing edge that this issue is there. As the DGWE, I have the onerous responsibility of working this procedure, and hence there are some understandings which are there under this. Those understandings in broad space that I would like to share it with all of us here. Of course, with a disclaimer that comments herein are entirely based on my personal observations. So when official stances which are to be taken, which are to be based upon data, analysis and issues around it, some contours will change, so those contours need to be accounted. We know if it don't ensure technological security and if it don't protect the technology that we have, we will land up in situations like this. And this country is very much amenable for a kind of a situation like this. We will try and avoid this. Whenever we try and speak about issues connected with technological security and sovereignty, the one beacon that we always normally take reference to is from an advanced country, the United States. The first portion which is there in the red is one stated policy of that government. Very categorical statement. By means of technological superiority in all areas, United States objective is overall technological superiority, period. So a nation is capable of making a statement like that. When we got our independence, could we have made a statement like this? The second one on the blue automatically tells we couldn't have made a statement like this. Because at that point in time, we were trying to assimilate and then trying to emerge as a nation together, so that the sociological issues and the societal portions will be the one that we are actually driving. So we couldn't have made a statement like this. But now, nearly 70 years down the line, can we make a statement like this? That, of course, for think tanks like GLOS can actually take a view on this portion. I think it is time that we started discussing about it, and can we make this kind of a statement or not? Because from that statement will flow all the things that we need to do for whatever we need to do. To this audience, I don't have to speak about the peculiarities of defense industry. When we say it is a strategic industry, there are issues which you are grappling with. The planned obsolescence. What do I mean by planned obsolescence? When you actually acquire a software-intensive embedded system, when he sells that system to you, he knows very well that he is going to upgrade that software, and he gives you an obsolete software, and along with this, he actually maneuvers you in such a way that you will have to take your annual maintenance contract also. And when he does the annual maintenance contract, he updates the software because it doesn't cost him any money. By updating that software, he has obsoleted all the support system that you got. Planned obsolescence. So that means the obsolescence is not something which is happening, it is planned, it is happening. So if you are not able to see through the planned obsolescence around here, you will definitely run into problems. Technology denial, we understand. Restricted trade that is there, which is governing the arena, we fully understand. When we know restricted trade, as Additional Secretary actually mentioned, that about the security that we need to provide for this technology, the security umbrella that we have to hold around this technology becomes very important. That it is monopsony is very well known to this audience, and that it is actually owned and operated by the government is also very well known, and hence the responsibility of that government that we need to actually measure up to this kind of a one. And we need to keep discussing this with a number of people, because unless the government finds a solution for it, nobody else is going to find a solution for it. Of course, there is a long gestation period that is involved, so anything that is there to do with this will actually be a slightly protracted affair. So in case we expect quick fix solutions around here, we are not going to work. We have got to discuss, we have got to arrive at consensus, and we have got to deploy the resources accordingly. Many issues which are there on guidelines on policy and technology, that it is a restricted, limited national resource. The second bullet, that it needs to be protected and invested in pursuit of national security objective, is very essential, because not only that you will possess this technology, but you need to protect this technology, and that protection calls for certain amount of investment also. So the very act of possession is not complete around here, that you will have to continue to protect this kind of a technology. Like Additional Secretary actually pointed out, that this technology is sustainable in case you have a kind of an international trade also facilitated into it. So that now when you do an international trading on this is not a kind of a commodity where you can do a kind of a free market commodity trading. So it has got to be a strategic trading, and the strategic trading has got its implications. And hence the export controls and the issues which are connected with it, all of them come into this. The defense technology base, we all know that they are DRDOs. Universities are just about emerging, but they need to emerge much more strongly than what they are. Private research facilities, nothing very significant to talk about, but we need to talk about the more of it. Defense industries and dual-use civilian industries, we definitely have some portion of it now emerging. As the civilian industry starts moving more and more into this high technology area, you will find that this gets embedded in the largely large issue of the national technology base. This is how advanced countries normally move, and we know that will happen. Whatever system that you have worked so far is leading us to something like this, what has been given this model. Major equipment is mostly DPSU and OFP centric, and the spare parts and components are private sector and small scale centric. ASN and MSME and the rest of the people can operate. Private sector, large scale, yes, they are in it, they are out of it, so that the issues which are there, we need to focus that. In this system, when we actually work, we normally tend to work with the tier 1 and the OEM integrator level. When we tend to address at that level. I would definitely think that for a kind of an ordered development of this one, we need to have the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, all of them coming in a kind of a way, they can coexist on that pyramid. But what we have done so far, our systems, how they have happened, is what is there on the right hand side. Is that the tier 1 does the OEM integrator does the tier 1 job, he does the tier 2 job, when the tier 3 job, when somebody closes around here, he does that job also, and hence we have a kind of a pyramid which is not a very neat kind of a pyramid, it is a very confused kind of a pyramid. Why this confusion comes about? Because many of our processes and procedures are all flawed up to this question. Because mostly we are operating in the government sector. In the government sector, probity in financial dealings is very highly important around. So that whenever I have worked with a vendor, there is no guarantee that I can give to him that I can continue working along with him for the decades to come. And hence, whenever a new order is placed around here, I will have to keep seeking new vendors. When I keep seeking new vendors, the old vendor may be egged out because I am unable to sit out. And hence you get to do a kind of a loop onto this. And hence you find that the people whom you have developed as a tier 3 vendor earlier is no longer able to participate in your kind of a supply chain process, and a new vendor comes in after having worked in and he doesn't perform around here, and hence a tier 2 one vendor or an OEM needs to descend down from his high pedestal and then come down to a tier 3 or tier 4 and then try and operate in this space because otherwise they will go from it. And many major technologies, because we have not been able to sustain it over a long period of time, we have lost many of our tier 2, tier 3 vendors. And defense technology is a precious technology. It is known only to a few people. The kind of reliabilities that we call for in this are very high. This one cannot be frittered away because we have certain infirmities in certain issues. We've evolved. The PAC report of 89 led to the defense procurement procedure of 92, the group of ministers report of 2001, the DPP 2002, 2005, 6, 8, 11. We've all been in defense procurement procedures, but we realized that we will not be able to work things only with the defense procurement procedure, and hence ministry came out with a very innovative and a very forward-looking defense production policy. We have Additional Secretary of Defense Production here, we want a very, very finely articulated kind of a policy. And the policy definitely got supported with that JV guidelines for the DPSC for 2012. So we do realize it is not possible for us to operate within the realm of that pages of defense procurement procedures. Many of those things which you need to operate on the defense procurement procedure, the conditions for that to operate, the ecosystem for that to operate, need to be controlled by other systems which are outside around there. That is the one you find in the DPP set of ones around here, defense production procedure, the JV guidelines for DPSU, and all of them are coming into picture. Even this kind of ones are not sufficient because, as I was telling earlier, defense industry cannot be sustained without export. So if it is to be exported, it will come in. Necessary that other Ministry of Finance, these are the RBI controls which are connected along with it, Ministry of Industry, all of them need to come in, so that it cannot just remain constricted within the department, within the Defense Ministry and operate this. We might have to go much beyond this, and for which efforts are being made. Defense production procedure, as I was telling you, is a very well articulated one. It not only tries to bring about the industry, private industry inside, it also gives us, for small and medium enterprises, it gives a kind of a position for this, and it also promises that the make procedure will be made simpler. I can assure definitely this one, that the make procedure is being made simpler, and we will very soon come to know about that make procedure. The JV guidelines for the TPSU that have been arrived at has also given a kind of a framework by which joint ventures can actually be entered in, and hence a formal method of these JVs have actually come into this. The very fine process that we have on this. We have studied this defense acquisition. There are more than 8 studies which have actually been done, and all those studies are listed around it. Have all studies been implemented? No. Have some of them been implemented? Yes. Does the present document actually reflect some of the sentiments which have been expressed and some of the recommendations which have been made in the study? Yes. But the kind of studies that we have done may not be sufficient. The US developed its acquisition system from 1960 onwards. They are there now for more than about 50 years now into the acquisition system. I'm sure that this audience would know what Robert McNamara did into the budgeting system there in the US, and after the defense acquisition system underwent a kind of a change. The DoD instruction 5000.1 was actually issued in 1970, and that one has undergone many kinds of changes. There have been 27 major studies in the US defense acquisition systems. Most major studies have been done not simply by the government organizations, but they have been done by large think tanks. You will find out of this 27 studies, that is, you will find that think tanks have actually conducted more than about 10 studies which have driven and changed the course of this acquisition. And hence think tanks' contribution continue to remain very seminal to drive this defense procurement processes and procedures ahead. We have our studies, we have our understanding, but all these understandings need to be actually coalesced and put together. Those who are actually getting somewhat seeing this, the younger lot who are there, if you actually want to move from technology and indigenous from DPP 2011 to 2013, on the phrase of it, you can actually say that the indigenous occurs more than double the number of times, nearly double the number of times in DPP 2011. It is that, simply because if you actually look at it. When we actually combine together and then talk, we normally talk about different procurement procedure. We very rarely talk about the DPM, Defense Procurement Manual, which is actually taking care of the revenue procurement, which takes care of the sustainment of the defense equipment. And the DPM is also an extremely valuable kind of a document that we need to look at in an issue that I would like to bring into the audience. Now I am going to be speaking about some kind of a models. But before I talk about some models around here, I must say that all models are wrong. George Bell said that, and we continue to do so. We all know water. Water is known as the H2O as a molecular model that we have. When we try to explain as to why a microwave oven actually heats up, that H2O will not be able to explain. Microwave oven, why does it heat up? If you put it in a microwave, it heats up because the hydrogen and oxygen molecules, the hydrogen and oxygen atoms in the water molecule have a covalent band. The covalent band that you have, that one is capable of vibrating at certain frequency. The microwave gives that kind of a frequency which is in resonance with that frequency. So when you microwave in a oven, the water molecule, the hydrogen and oxygen bond actually oscillates at a very high frequency, and that generates heat, and that heat is the one that actually heats up the microwave. Now if you take a H2O molecular model onto it and after that apply it over to this one, you will never be able to explain. So that every model has got a place, so that within that place it is suitable and outside that place it is not suitable. And hence every model is somewhat wrong, but they are definitely useful because without model we will not be able to speak about abstract things. Hence there is a model. Defense economy model. Dual use economy, high-tech civilian sector, low-tech civilian sector are the bottoms on which this model actually builds up. And over that what we have is the defense economy model. So that in case you want to build a defense economy model, unless you have built the bottom portion of it, there is no way that it could happen. And civil-military integration is definitely very essential. Of course, I don't miss an opportunity at all to quote Carl Wilson anywhere and everywhere. Carl Wilson, as the audience would definitely know, the longest served senator in the US who actually expounded the values of the defense forces in the US. A complete fleet is named after him, USS Carl Wilson is actually known for, and he said that there is nothing more costly to the nation than cheap armed forces. There is nothing more costly. Okay. After having said all those things, after having given those models around here, now that we are working this DPP around, we said that we got to obtain license for defense. any defense production, the license is to be obtained. But for this license application, when you are actually doing, there is a code which is necessary for you to specify this portion. And that code is actually mentioned in 2 parts around there, and those 2 parts seem to be having some amount of omissions and certain amount of contradictions. There is a need for us to harmonize this. And that we need to understand, in case we are going in for some export issues, then some international arrangements have got to be seen. And the Wassenaar arrangement is one major arrangement on which we are actually discussing, and we are going ahead with it. And probably this Wassenaar arrangement is an international arrangement, and once we join, it will take us a bit of time for us to qualify and then join in this Wassenaar arrangement. The moment we join, then probably the export related issues will be somewhat eased, because we will have a kind of a framework that is management as an international arrangement. US has definitely developed a technology readiness level framework. So that means in case we want to take any kind of a technology and we want to find out, like you said that we've got 5 types of categorization, Buy Indian is the most preferred categorization. How do I know that a particular technology is in the Buy Indian level? Who is the one who is actually going to tell that it is going to be at the Buy Indian level? So that means we need to have some kind of a gradation, and we need to have some method by which we are able to classify this technology. Their maturity levels are understood, and those maturity levels which we understand are actually codified, and that codification is understood by all of us. And if we do that, then we will be able to say that this technology is definitely a Buy Indian technology, because it is on the technology readiness level 6 and beyond, and hence you must work along with it. But do we have these kinds of standards which have been adopted? Within DRDO, they have adopted some portions of it, but outside also we got adopted, and we need to recognize it within the DPP that if these technology readiness levels are actually assessed and put into that kind of a value, that we are able to map it into a particular kind of a categorization that we want. The last technological readiness level, number 9, qualified through successful mission operation. Very potent kind of a one. We all tend to squabble about as to whether you are specifying operational requirement, whether you are specifying technology, when to specify operational requirement, your qualitative requirement, when to specify technology. Notwithstanding all the things that you mentioned around there, finally what you got to do is you got to meet the mission needs. So that means meeting the mission needs, if it requires certain specifications, those specifications must be mentioned here. So the mission need must be the most superior kind of a requirement around here, and I would definitely go by this technological readiness level number 9, is that it meets the mission need, yes, that we are definitely there. We have another major problem why we have constantly been going to the different PSUs and known methods, because we have always have this kind of an issue as to how do we validate the cost when a defense technology is done by the private sector. We do not have adequate instrument to probe the cost when the cost is actually incurred by the private sector. Since it is a kind of a monopoly kind of a one, and the customer is only one, and hence a kind of a costing of this can actually lead to monopolies on this, and hence we need to develop some probing methods for this. These probing methods are not formally available, and we need to develop, the think tanks need to figure out a method by which these probing methods are established and then factored in, and if it is given in, then DPP can actually recognize this. While we have the DRDO doing the R&D, and while we have the Ordnance Factory Board doing the manufacture, but translating from a lab to the manufacturing facility, there is a large gap. The one that works in the lab will not work when you're actually doing millions of pieces of production. The production technology is so very different from a lab technology. We do not have a design and delivery, the manufacturing design delivery kind of a department in a kind of a national level. We do have some amount of design and development kind of departments in DPSUs, but we do not have a formal structure which will take a lab design and then deliver it in such a way it is manufacturable in large quantities. That's where our TOTs tend to degenerate into build to print and nothing more than that. Because we need to do something more than this, and if you have this kind of a one put in by the means of the structure, and if that structure gets recognized around, then we will find that more and more of our R&D actually sees this. One issue that I would definitely like to flag to this audience is that I need to have database on defense industrial base. when we go through, I depend upon James, I depend upon BSNB, I depend upon so many other databases which are there. I do not have a very valid database which is available within the country, which will actually put up my tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 vendors at different levels and then tell that these are the capabilities that they have and they are rated, that they are available, and that rating is constantly changing around here, so that based upon that rating I can actually take this into account. We do not have these kinds of things. Compare this with the kind of models that we have in advanced countries, that the different capability readiness, the readiness awareness issues are well documented and well available, and it is available for consultation. And the last issue, that while the DPP has given us number of issues, but we need certain guidelines. Cost estimation needs to be done. Now we do not have any guideline on this cost estimation. We all estimate cost as we understand it, but that one might not work all the time. We have got now prioritized in the DPP 2013 that there are 5 categories in which we will actually prioritize. But the agencies who are actually going to comment upon this, they do not have a guideline as to which way that you are going to look at one priority versus the other priority. This is again left to us to interpret. It gives us the freedom to interpret the way in which we want, but it will actually lead to a number of democratic discussions which will actually delay the decision-making process, so we need guidelines on this. When we need to interact with the industry, we do not have a formal forum. Do I speak to CI? Do I speak to Association? Do I speak to Sticky? Do I speak to Punjab Chamber of Commerce? Whom do I speak? Who is this industry? How do I, where is the forum in case I have spoken to that forum, I have spoken to the industry? I have no idea. So that means unless we have method by which we come together and we need to dialogue with the industry so much more around here. With the different industrial based study, if I want to have some clarification, if I want to speak to that industry, so that I am able to speak to the industry. As of now, if I speak to X, Y takes offense to it, either you seem to be friendly with X, so that we better don't speak to the X, neither to the X, nor to the Y. Not good. We need guidelines, we need structures for this. We have identified consortium of industries to participate in a number of our acquisitions. But the consortium itself has not been defined as it. Whether company law is good enough to define this consortium, whether the consortium needs to be defined in this context of defense procurement, are all issues for which we are looking forward to guidelines. The think tanks can actually evolve some draft guidelines and help us with this whole process. Finally, request you to consider simplifying the defense product code. Wassenaar arrangement will definitely help us to adopt this readiness level framework. May not be the US one, maybe an Indian one that we have. Instrument to probe cost for private industry. From R&D to manufacture, how do we translate? Base studies for defense industry can we do, and then can we look at guidelines for all this? Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, General Subramaniam. In his own characteristic style, General Subramaniam has brought out all the relevant points very forthrightly. These are all points that keep being tackled at various levels, but we don't have set answers to that. And if you see this talk in connection with the previous talk, you will realize that the hierarchy itself knows exactly where the problems are. But they are trying to improve it. They are trying their best to do a lot of improvements in the existing procedures, but obviously things take time. And then the most important thing is the implementation of any changes that are made. Having said that, now let's see what Dr. Jayajit Bhattacharya has to say. I may request you.
And this will be the driest presentation possible because all that I'll be doing is presenting the compilation of issues in terms of procurement that the industry felt that exist when they are dealing with the Indian military. The issues were compiled by CDEP clause with support from Catalyst Constellations LLP. The general view is that DPP 2013 is a positive step forward for tuning the defense procurement towards greater local procurement. However, there continues to be perceptions that the defense procurement process somehow still disincentivizes local industry. And there are details to why this view is coming in from the industry. Categorization itself seems to be a very significant issue. The concept of categorization is a good step forward. But there's a need for the categorization committee to critically examine essential factors like the capability of the industry itself. Many of the areas, the capability does not exist, therefore clauses such as TOT and so on would help. But there does not seem to be enough capability to even adopt the technologies that are being offered. The difficulty in mastering complex, high-end critical technologies, which will end up twisting the entire regime, wherein essentially the more critical sub-components will get imported or will get imported by third parties, stamped, and then included inside your larger system product. And then that gets sold to the army in the garb of being local. Foreign restrictions on military equipment, and some of them were knocked out by Mr. Gupta. And the issues about re-export and so on starts coming in, and that was noted by the industry also. The urgency of induction of equipment by the armed forces before carrying out procurement categorization. So the decision to first induct and then the categorization happens seems to be a little perplexing for the industry. Then the whole question of what constitutes Indian should not hinder the procurement process. Provide simpler process for evaluating indigenous content, and that's what General Subramanian was also mentioning. The issue with what constitutes Indian is that by certain parameters one can decide that the product being offered is Indian, there is 30% content which is Indian. The competitor will think that that's not true and will send 5 letters saying that this is what's happening and the product is not really 30%, it's actually 28.6% or whatever. The upshot will be that the entire procurement process will come to a standstill. And that's harmful for both the military and the industry. Please note that there is no solution being offered. These are problems. The industry also could not come out with solutions, but these are problems that were stated. Need to clarify issues related to taxes. Apparently, taxation seems to be discriminatory. There is certain procurement where the foreign vendor need not pay the duties, whereas the excise duties and so on for manufacturing locally are still being loaded onto the domestic manufacturer, and therefore the perception is that there is some discriminatory regime built into the taxation system. The industry required clarity on industrial licensing, implementation, and evaluation of offsets. They still believe that the clarity is not there, and therefore a lot of them are not coming forward. They don't know who to speak to, and they don't know how to take things forward. And I'm sure the good officers of Mr. Gupta would help clarifying some of these issues and take that forward. Then the issue that we have been talking about since morning is point procurement versus roadmaps. Capability cannot be built up for a point procurement, for a point tender being brought up. Unless a roadmap is published and a roadmap of procurement against the roadmap of technology is published, it will be challenging for the industry to invest in point tenders coming out. And therefore, models such as the Kickstarter model, which is more in the private sector, could be considered. What the Kickstarter model does is that a lot of private investors invest in terms of buying the product if you are able to create it and manufacture it and give it. So these are product ideas put up on the website, and then the civilian population goes and bids for it and says, I'll buy the product. Doesn't really fund the product development, but says, I'll buy the product at this price once you come up with it. Possibly that kind of a model in the defense might help, where instead of just saying that, please build this and then we'll consider buying it, I'll buy this if it meets these specifications. If that kind of an order can come out, then that will be useful for the industry. Managing offset seems to be a very significant issue. Need of effective monitoring and accountability of the offset process by enhancing the knowledge and experience of executing offsets, enhanced transparency in offset contracts, and increased interaction and cooperation among the stakeholders seems to be critical. There seems to be a vacuum, there seems to be a lack of a institutional process which would develop the capability in the domestic industry to leverage offsets, and bringing that in would be extremely helpful. Then there are issues just specific to the ICT procurement. So DPP apparently appears to be geared for armament and weapon system sector, which have got long life cycle with little or no upgrades, and ready product is put through field trials for evaluation. The other part of this coin is what General Subramaniam also pointed out, which is the planned obsolescence that starts coming in. And therefore, what is not covered in this part of the presentation but kept aside are the institutional changes required within the procurement process within the military, which was discussed as part of the workshops that happened which preceded this conference. And some of the suggestions that came out was having the knowledge of the uniformed officer captured, and therefore the officer who's doing the procurement stays for a longer time so that they're aware of some of these issues such as planned obsolescence, and therefore process can be put into place to stop such planned obsolescence from happening, or at least delay such kind of an obsolescence. But coming back to the gripe from the industry, since ICT has got shorter life cycles, the view is that in many cases, by the time the actual contract comes out, the RFP comes out, the field trials happens, and then they start implementing, the product has already become obsolete. Because in ICT, it's a very delicate structure that is there, because there are multiple layers of software. If one single layer changes, then the integration between all the layers becomes a challenge. And in a period of 18 to 20 months, it is for sure that some of the layers will change. Either the OS will change or the web server will change and so on. And once that happens, the entire system becomes very brittle. It does not, it stops working. And some of it is because of what you pointed out, and some of it because of technological approaches also. Clearly, 20 to 24 months is long for ICT to be adopted in this kind of fashion, and therefore, in the service sector, field trials and show me before I buy appears to be not applicable from the industry perspective. The role of the system integrator seems to be limited to ICT installation and system performance of COTS hardware and software. So in some cases, COTS is very useful when there are generic applications to be put in. In some cases where we believe that there can be a strategic advantage out of innovative solutions and indigenous solutions, then perhaps alternatives to COTS should be looked at. That's the view of some of the domestic system integrators. There's limited scope for optimization and leveraging the system integrators' knowledge, which could have potentially provided a strategic advantage to the Indian military. The global OEMs usually work on upfront payment policies, thereby not being a party to the risk in case of a failure of a project. So apparently what happens is the system integrator picks up the project, and back to back they give the orders to the global OEMs, who then takes an upfront payment and walks off, and do not have a skin in the game in the implementation of the entire system. So that's the industry reality. Again, the solution has not been offered on how one can mitigate this, but there seems to be a problem in how systems and softwares are being procured. The procurement process leading to faster obsolescence, and we just talked about it, the shorter shelf life of ICT assets driven by obsolescence that is accentuated by multiple projects with pilot approach, followed by planning for enterprise-wide rollout, followed by long procurement cycle. So typically what the industry has observed that a lot of pilots are taken off, and out of them, some of them are shortlisted for a enterprise-wide rollout, out of which some of them then go into a procurement cycle. This entire period usually crosses 2 to 3 years, if not more. Clearly, finally what the ICT asset comes in has got a much shorter life cycle, because 3 to 4 years has already been consumed in planning for acquiring that asset. This leads to multiplicity of technology platforms, because you're acquiring parts of the system at various points in time, and therefore there are issues of an integrated solution, because it's really very challenging to keep all of them integrated, and therefore you would continuously bleed, financially speaking, in trying to keep them integrated and keep them working. Need to plan for projects at enterprise level, followed by phased implementation if desired, and therefore sharing the project roadmap is critical. What is again appears to be happening is that point solutions are purchased, and then a overall enterprise architecture is fitted into it. What the industry is asking for is if the enterprise architecture can first be thought of and be shared with the industry, and then parts of it gets implemented. We of course know the ground realities and the challenges in doing that, but that's a wish list from the industry. So the piecemeal approach also potentially discourages larger players in ICT technology from participating in systems development and investing in the sector for long term. Current procurement is product-centric and not roadmap-centric, and therefore the implementation of the Ministry of Defence declared policy of LTIPP needs to be made public as soon as possible, and we know the entire thing will not be made public, but whatever is relevant and whatever can be made public would help in streamlining the investments from the private sector. The RFP process, the RFP team must include experienced officers from the field units of the respective system or domain. The view again is that the industry does not know how the concepts are being put together, who's putting it together, because after the system is implemented and delivered to the user group within the military, the user group pretty often comes back and says this is not what we wanted, asks for many changes, and the changes, if accepted, leads to cost and budget overrun. And if they're not accepted, then the system is not useful for the end user. And therefore, there seems to be some kind of a gap in the backend of how these concepts are being put together. And hence, there is a wish from the industry that there should be involvement of such experienced officers from the stage of AON to the stage when the project is under development, and would lead to more appropriate identification of the requirements of the field level. Again, all of these can be disputed. This is the view from the industry side without understanding the mechanisms of the internal workings of the military. It will also be useful to have a higher implementability of the RFPs. Many of the RFPs don't see the light of the day. They stay for 18 months and then they get cancelled. And therefore the bid prices, even the bid managers for that matter, change. The prices are known to the industry. And therefore the entire investment, especially in the large complex system bids that come in, the entire investment, which are pretty significant investments, go down the drain. And a lot of players drop out when the second round of the same system RFP comes in. And therefore, if it can be formulated through an open consultative process that leverages vendor domain knowledge, again, every vendor cannot be exposed to the entire system, but if piecemeal exposure can be given, which is relevant to their own vertical expertise, then the stakeholder consultation should be limited to vendors from the specialized verticals, because you do not want to expose your entire system to any one particular vendor. And the final RFP could be created based on the input from each of the consultative process with each of the specialized vendors. There are some of the best practices that were suggested. Need to have a robust and accountable change control mechanism for rapid inclusions, exclusions from the RFP and the UI. The change control mechanism seems to be arbitrary, long drawn, based on the negotiation power, which is always higher with the customer than the vendor, and therefore that leads to significant cost overruns for the vendor. Public website where non-mission critical and non-confidential requirements and RFI for defense procurements can be hosted for solution providers and academicians to propose a solution. So can we have a mechanism where we say this is our outcome that is needed, not the output, not that I need a gun, but I need to destroy the enemy. So that's the outcome. Then there can be many ways of reaching that outcome, and let the industry come out with solutions, and they can have confidential discussions and say, here is my various suggestions that I can suggest to achieve your outcome. And the outcome can be anything. What is typically happening right now is that I need this solution because this is what I've seen elsewhere. May not be appropriate for the Indian situation, and also we're not leveraging the deep IT might that we have in this country, which Mr. Chandrasekhar was referring to in the previous session. So Team Orlando of USA can be used as a model for this kind of participative R&D and production. E-procurement should be widely adopted for ISTEC procurement by military, and that was resonated across every single player in the industry, saying e-procurement is a must for the army and the military in total. So with that, I'm not going to all other details that have come out, which is there in the pre-conference paper that has been circulated. It's also there on the website. There are many more suggestions that have come out, and they are there in the paper. In the interest of time, I'm just putting in some of the key procurement issues that were blacked out. And I would like to wind up by quoting this from Sun Tzu, The Art of Warfare, that with only strategy and no tactics will lead to partial success. But with only tactics and no strategy is a sure path to failure. Unless you plan out, unless you have an enterprise-wide architecture, unless you have a roadmap, and we have the strategy for procurement put into place, this tactical procurement would be detrimental to both the military and the industry. With that, I'll stop my talk over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Jaydeep. But Jaydeep has stolen most of my thunder. I was to speak on ICT. He's already spoken on ICT. So, great. I would also like to assure Jaydeep that while you raised relevant points, many of these points have already been implemented or are in the process of being implemented. Whether they've reached completion or they've reached fructification is a moot point. But the process has started. Okay, and there is a fair amount of transparency, there is the procurement. The things of that nature are there. And, it's a good sign that we're progressing in the path that the industry wants us. I think now I'll go there and speak to you. Ladies and gentlemen, before I start speaking, I want to do a survey, which is part of my research. I hope all of you are wearing size 8 shoes. Anybody who is not wearing, kindly raise your hand. Okay, please, thank you. So good, you all are not conforming to the DPP. The DPP has been made on the premise that one size fits all. So if you had believed in the DPP, you would have all been wearing one particular size or not. I would also like to take the permission of the organizers to expand ICT to ICTech. I firmly believe that information communication technology without electronics and cyber is incomplete. And all of them have to go hand in hand to make any meaning to this industry. That there are problems is evident from the previous speakers. That such seminars are being held is because of that. Where do the problems lie? Let's see this one by one. Let's see the policies. The major problem is that the DPP is structured for defense procurements, and when we talk of defense procurement, we talk of large-scale items which are going to live for 20, 25 years. Tanks, guns, things of that nature. To club ICT, which is an ongoing process, which changes every 3 years, is fraught with danger. This was something which was recognized by Mr. Kallam Raju in 2011, end of 2011 in a conference, and he ordered a board to introduce a special chapter on ICT procurements, which would be fast track, which would finish from start to end within a year. A board was ordered by the IDS. The board is still proceeding. I was asking Mr. Gupta whether that proceedings have been submitted to them and have they incorporated it in the DPP. Answer is no, not yet. So that is something which is a crime need of the day. And we have to be very careful from the services side that we know what we are asking for. Normally what happens is we are also to blame. We keep blaming everybody else, but when we look inside, we are also to blame. We start making procedures which are utopian. When we sit down to do staff work, we ask for all types of requirements which cannot be met. We may put in procedures which will take lengthy time, and then when it comes to procurement, then we start blaming everybody else. So we have to make our procedures more simple, our requirements more practical. Now, ICTech is a different ballgame. Why it is a different ballgame? As Mr. Chandrasekhar said in the morning, few years earlier, it was defense which was leading the research in this sphere. And therefore, very few products came out in many years. Maybe one new product came out in 5 years, 6 years, because it came out of the defense lab and then it was released for public use, and then commercial industry adopted it. Today, it is the commercial industry which is leading research. And because of its survivability, the number of products, the number of iterations, the number of changes that are coming out in the market are mind-boggling. The research that is happening in the commercial field in this sphere is churning out newer versions every 3 months. Technology changes every 3 months. It is true that for the defense to follow the latest technology would be foolish unless we adopt technology which has been proved on ground. That means second tier technology. We will be treading in a fool's paradise. However, that also places an embargo. How does it place an embargo? Look at the procurement cycle. To get an AON, categorization, RFI, RFP itself takes about 2 to 3 years. Whatever may be written in the DPP doesn't happen in that time frame. It takes 2 to 3 years. Then comes the RFP, the trials, the field trials, the introduction, etc., etc. by the time the equipment ends up, and if you are lucky, it takes 7 years at least. Thereafter is the life cycle of the electronic equipment. 7 years at least. Actually, it turns out to be much more. So how much does that add up to? 10 to 15 years. How many cycles of technology have changed? Are you permitted to make changes even if you are aware of changes while the procurement process is on? No, you're not. You can't even change a comma. Then you have to go back through the entire cycle all over again. Couple this with the internal procedures of the defense forces. If you are quite convinced that you have to introduce a new equipment, you have to introduce a new scaling, then the procedure followed for that is even more complex. Our directorates, our think tanks like the PP and the MO do wonderful work. They come out with new policies, they come out with new doctrines, and they also come out with technologies that will support that. But what happens on the ground? They cannot be supported by the procurement process. Internal procurement process, forget about the DP. Because you have already scaled up, you are inventorized for the next 7 years. So you can make no changes. The thing which you started 7 years back was based on previous doctrines. Now that will come, and you can't change that for the next 7 years. You want to introduce new equipment, you can't do it, because it cannot be categorized easily. By the time it gets categorized, it's outdated. You cannot scale it because the people who clear this will ask you what is it replacing. That's especially the finance guys. They don't understand why technology is changing, so they will ask you, what is this piece of equipment replacing? Now that scales which were there are Second World War scales. What will it replace? It will replace nothing. It's a new edition. Others may go out of service, but the new equipment is not replacing anything. So these are issues in policy matters which we have to look into, which we have to change ourselves, and we have to see this in the context of doctrines. If our doctrines are changing every 7 years, then the related procedures should also change. If our doctrines are changing in 2 years, then the procedures should also, our procedures and equipment tables should change in conformity with that time period, and both should not follow independent channels. Now, another aspect which comes up is when you come to selection of equipment. This equipment comes up to you, it is selected only on one criteria, and that is the finance, L1 criteria. Who in the world will get the best of equipment which will serve the stated purpose in the manner it is expected to at the lowest price? Why is it that every user has been clamoring for a T1 insertion, and yet nowhere in our policies, whether in DPP or any other policy, has T1 ever been inserted? Why can't it be a combination of T1 and L1? Or let it be technical evaluation first, and thereafter we go on to the finance evaluation? Why is it that the DPP says that they are encouraging Indian vendors? But if you see DPP, it doesn't work in isolation. It works with the rest of the country's regulations. Why is it that the tax regime does not support Indian manufacturing? Why is it that there is a disadvantage of almost 12.5% for Indian manufacturers, for Indian SIs to supply equipment? Why is it that the criteria that is laid down for qualification to bid for defense projects is so high that the SMEs can't even bid for it? So what are we supporting? The Indian ecosystem is very well known for good policies. We have good policies, but we have isolated good policies. We are not looking at the entire ecosystem in its entirety. Now, in the IC Tech field, all of you sitting here will agree with me that most of the equipment that is being introduced has to be COTS duly sanitized, duly hardened, but it is COTS equipment nonetheless. If we were to agree with the government saying that we want to support indigenization, then why is it that the MOD is against PMA? The government has made a beautiful policy of preferential market access, which supports 30% indigenized content. But when it comes to implementation, when it comes to applicability, the answer is that it will not apply to defense projects. Yes, it should not apply to many defense projects, but why not ICTech? As it is, you are buying equipment from the commercial market. What are the Indian vendors doing today? They are not manufacturing equipment. They are just system integrators. They are adding value to pieces of equipment which are manufactured outside and which are integrated in India and supplied for use within the defense forces. So is it supplied in the commercial world. So what is the difference? The difference is only in security. Leave that as a core area. But in the non-core area, why is PMA not being accepted? If you have to support Indian industry, these are the measures we must look at. These are existing policies of the government and which must be looked at differently for ICTech and differently for other military procurements. Another question for the user. Why is it that the Indian military mindset is still besotted with the fact that we should only own our own systems? When the ICTech environment in the country is developing at such a fast rate, when your own personal communications are relying on commercial equipment, why is it that when we want to go to war or we want to go for an exercise or even in peacetime, we want communication networks, we still insist at the planning stage that it should be owned by our own networks. It should be supported by our own army-owned or defense-owned networks. Why? Why is it that we can't lease out from existing suppliers, existing networks? Why is it that we can't rent it out from them, the facilities that we want, secure it and use it? It will save us the problem of technology refresh. It will save us the problem of procurement. It will save us the problem of maintenance, and yet it will support indigenization, which is the avowed aim of the government. We must start looking at these things in this manner. In critical areas, when we go to war, yes, we have to own our own systems. But when we are in peacetime, how are our requirements different from the civil war? Possibly, a corporate honcho requires communications of a much higher standard than what we require sitting in Delhi. Yet, our qualifications, our capital investment in this network are much higher. We must look at that. Now, there are two types of, to my mind, there are two types of ICTech procurements. One is current, and the second is futuristic. When I say current ICTech is what is to be deployed now in the next 2 to 3 years, following the procurement procedure, of course, and then which is going to last us for about 10 to 15 years, which means effectively one developmental cycle. Long term is it starts now, but starts being procured after about 10 to 15 years. So what I was talking of till now was the current procurement, which is to replace or augment or come in as a fresh installation for networks and associated areas in the next 10 years. The futuristics is where we should start doing R&D now. And to look at these futuristic technologies, we need to have say that we require R&D is not sufficient, to my mind. You require knowledge, you require wisdom, you require research separately, you require development separately, you require production separately. Do we have adequate knowledge converted into wisdom within the army? In pockets, yes. Overall, no, because we are soldiers. We know how to derive and utilize communications with ICTech facilities, but we are not researchers. We are not academics. That we have to say, we can sit down and we can see the trends, analyze and see what benefits can come to us by which technology. The advantage is we are users, and if we are supplemented with the knowledge of technology, then we can use that technology for our operational needs in the future. How do we get that? We can't do it ourselves, so we must partner, and we must partner in the PPP mode with academia and industry. They are the people who are going to be current in technology. They are the people who know what is going to come, because it is their job. Your job is soldiering and how to use this technology for soldiering. Sit with them in verticals. don't sit with them in horizontals. The moment you sit with them in horizontals, you are letting out state secrets. You are letting out your plans. But if you sit in particular verticals, if you sit in one vertical with one group, you talk to them about that technology, they will educate you. Give them your requirements, sit with them, discuss with them, you will know what is going to come around the corner. So form groups of that nature. The integration will come through the core area, which will be purely held with your own organization. So that is where organizations like VESI will come. That is where organizations which are only manned by uniformed guys will come. So they then will build up the entire plan. So having gained knowledge and wisdom, next let's go on to what we loosely call as R&D, research and development. Now these are two different things. Research will flow from wisdom. It will come out as plans. It will come out as prototypes. It will come out as a lab model. So that lab model will be working as per the plan. It will give you what you require in the lab. It cannot be converted to a production line. There is something which is called development. Now, if you look at the statistics, which I'm borrowing from one of the firms which is engaged in this business, 30%, 30 or 35% of research for the world in IC Tech happens in India. That happens for India, but it happens in India by Indians. Almost 22% of the production happens in India. 0% of the development happens in India. So what happens is these guys do the research, the designs are taken to some foreign country, the development work is there, done there, and then the production line gets set up either there or come back to India, and the production is sold off as foreign made equipment. Why can't we set up our own development labs? SMEs cannot be expected to set up their own development labs even as a group. The cost is prohibitive. The government, the Ministry of Defense can join hands in this. Each ministry has funds for this. But they do it in bits and pieces in scattered regions. Why can't they all get together and set up a development agency which provides these facilities? Any IC Tech solution which has to be of any use requires to conform to standards and protocols. What is the method of testing of standards and protocols today? Just a compliance statement. I send out a RFP, you have to comply with such and such standard. Complied? Yes. If he says yes, it is taken for granted that it is compliant. Actually, it doesn't happen when it comes for trials or it is introduced, it doesn't comply. There are complicated labs and facilities to be set up, which is a crying need today, both in the civil as well as in the military world, where these compliances and categorizations, with technical categorizations and calibrations have to be done. Whether it is the Ministry of IT or Telecom or Defense, all together, but this is a requirement where compliances have to be taken note of. Let all equipment which is coming into India be tested through these labs. Let the foreign equipment also get tested. You will find that most of the foreign equipment that comes, which is proprietary in nature, and they say that they are compliant, will get rejected. Because they don't actually comply. They tweak the parameters, they say comply, and we take it for granted that they comply. You take a Alcatel exchange, you work with the Siemens exchange, so they've written they comply, they don't. Why? They tweaked it. And that is how they earn their money. Somebody just mentioned about updates, they didn't mention about updates, which is a fact. Convert TEC or DOT into a compliance lab if we can set up our own compliance lab. N number of funds are available. N number of funds are available for this purpose. We are not utilizing them properly. Advantage will be if we set up these two facilities that I mentioned, it is not only the bigger players, Indian bigger players which will benefit, it will also be the SMEs because these facilities will be made available to them. And once they comply in that, then they are eligible for participation in government procurements. This is as far as procedures are concerned. Now let's look at industry. Whatever industrial people I have interacted with have one refrain that your policies are not okay. You see what happens is when they are in front of policymakers, they are in front of the finance guys who matter, they all keep saying yes, whatever you're doing is good. The moment they go outside and have a cup of tea, they say, "Yes, galat hai." We are being discriminated against. Now, if you go into details, they have a genuine reason of saying that they are being discriminated against. But the demands are also atrocious. They say that we will invest in R&D only if you assure us that a diktat will be followed will be made to all government agencies to buy only from Indian vendors. Now that is going back to the ambassador and Fiat days, where we saw that there was no development in the automobile sector because everything was concentrated in these two branches and others are not permitted to come. See the situation now. So a level playing field only means that you will be permitted to participate, but if you can't compete with world-class players, then you might as well close shop. And this I will request the Additional Secretary also to take note, holds true for the PSUs also. They should not be given orders on a plate. They should be made to compete. And if they can compete with the rest of the ecosystem, only then they should get the orders. Yes, they have their advantages. But what is happening today is they are content with the knowledge that we will get these orders anyway. And they produce substandard goods, or they produce foreign goods packaged as Indian, and they start selling this to the government agencies. This must stop, and the competition should be fair and free. Transparency. Jayji touched upon it briefly. We must know where the so-called verticals are heading in the next 10, 15, 20 years in the ICT arena. We are not letting out anything. We have to be in conformity with industry. We don't have to imbibe everything of industry, but whatever the ICT industries, whatever directions they are taking, we can't be distinct from them. How we utilize it is something we don't have to tell the industry, Indian industry or foreign industry. This will give faith to the Indian industry to invest in R&D. Problem of Indian industry is not infrastructure, problem is not of brain, problem is not of even funds. They say that they will get funds from wherever they get funds. Problem is of marketability. Problem is that they are being negatively discriminated against foreign vendors. The tax regime is totally in favor of the foreign vendors. The policies which were meant to give succor to Indian vendors have not been implemented on the ground. They've been made on paper, they've not been implemented. PMA is one such example. This has to be corrected. And this is not MOD's domain. MOD's DPP is fine, but it has to work within the constraints of the government of Indian policies, other policies. They have to make a recommendation to the other ministries, to finance ministry especially. But this is where there is a dichotomy. This is where you have to set things right. How can we do all this? This is a big basket of things that we have to do. It involves policymakers, it involves the environment, it involves vendors, and it involves the user. Now, if you give it to each one of them and say that you do it yourself, it will not happen. So therefore, the papers for this seminar have brought out a very useful idea that we should have an organization in place where representatives of all these people sit together autonomously, or people who are respected in the country sit together, who are known for their integrity sit together, and then they deliberate on all these issues, and then they advise the respective stakeholders in what directions to go. And the stakeholder departments themselves then institute measures to see that these advices are accepted. So whether it is going to be a Section 25 company or it is going to be a society, doesn't matter. Those are matters of detail which can be brought into. But we have to certainly get into this mode where it is ownership by all of us, and not ownership only of the government agency or the user to see what they get. Such sort of a thing will also help looking at responsibility is being ascribed to government agencies. Today, if I have issued the RFP and if I cancel that RFP after 2 years, nobody is there to question. What happened to the money that the industry has sunk into trials of that? The so-called NCNC trials. Lakhs and lakhs of rupees have gone into that. Who's going to repay that? So those are issues which will come to the table, and those are issues which will have to be looked into very carefully. We, from the government side, will also have to see that we get what we are wanting to get. And we are not, nobody forces anything down our throat just because we have to buy to meet targets of some DPSC or CPSC. Gentlemen, I just gave some random thoughts which I have been facing in the last 30 years, 40 years, and I take them for whatever they are worth. I would have given you a structured presentation, but for the fact that Jayajit stole whatever I had to say, all relevant points, so thank you very much. Yeah, now we are open to question and answers.
Last 5 years or so, MOE has been stating, has been talking about trust in privatization effort. In privatization effort, on the other hand, you just mentioned that there are offsets to the order of 8 to 10 billions available. And thirdly, General Ghoshal rightly brought out that there are delays. Up to AON itself takes 2 to 3 years. Now, keeping all these issues in mind, what are the institutional changes that you are contemplating in the Ministry of Defence to accelerate the whole process?
You are talking about, I mean, it's a huge question, I mean.
Yes. So, what I'm trying to say that you are looking forward to
Yeah.
and as we see, there are no changes.
See, I mean, okay, I mean, let me tell you a few things which are underway. One is make procedure. I think General Subramaniam referred to 4 items which I have copied down. Make procedure, to simplify make procedure. So I am heading a committee which is simplifying this make procedure. And in the earlier make procedure, there are no guidelines for consortium. The word consortium has been mentioned that they can apply, but what type of consortium? How do they form consortium? What is the eligibility? Net worth, their rating, all these things are not there. So we have drafted the make procedure, and very soon it should be a part of as chapter 2 in the DPP. And it has got a lot of, it is not simplified in that sense, we are streamlining how the IPR need to be shared, how the cost sharing should take place, what should be the criteria and the sub-criteria and the expression of interest. What should be the, what should be formed in the DPR, this one, the draft project report, which is submitted by the development agency. So all these things we are clarifying. So hopefully, because we want to demystify this make procedure, no make project has gone ahead except terminal and secrecy device, TESD, which is done by the 2 PSUs and all. That is one. Second, I am also heading a committee for reviewing the offset guidelines. We have invited suggestions, we have held a number of deliberations with all the stakeholders, and we have taken comments from the industries also. So we know there are problems in implementation, there are problems in evaluation. I think Dr. Bhattacharya referred about the evaluation and all. So we should be able to come out with more implementable and simplified guidelines and more user-friendly, I would say. Second part. Third, of course, I think there was a mention of the joint venture guidelines for the DPS implementation. Again, there are some issues in that. So that also, I mean, my committee is looking into and come out with something. How do we offload the works to the joint ventures in a transparent manner and with price discovery? See, the problem with the joint ventures is if something has been given to the say DPSUs on nomination basis, which is being given in the shipping sector or to the HAL, then back to back nomination cannot happen. You can't just further offload that same work to another joint venture or another private sector. So what should be the mechanism of price discovery, that also we are looking into. This is another issue. Because sometimes, these PSUs are overloaded and they need to offload certain type of activities which can be done in the private sector. But how do they go about? So that is a part of the joint venture. And of course, I think you mentioned about, thing is about restructuring of HAL based on the recommendations of the B.K. Chaturvedi committee. So I am also heading a committee for implementation of these recommendations, but that is a long-run process going on for last 6 months, and at present restructuring of the board of HAL is taking place. So there are various elements in that restructuring. This is what I can tell you at present. Of course, a number of things we have introduced in the DPP 2013, apart from the hierarchy of categorization which is being talked about, and much less known item which is there is the defining indigenous content. How to measure indigenous content? At present, so far, how do we measure it? We say we don't talk about, we talk about only indigenous purchase. If anything is purchased from the HAL, it is taken under indigenous purchase. HAL might be importing lot of kits, lot of subsystems, but then since payment is made to the HAL in rupees, the entire thing gets categorized as, in our records, in our books of the MOD, as indigenous purchase. Now we would like to capture down to the last year what is the value addition which has taken place at each tier, and then we will come out what is indigenous content and what is imported content. So this way, this 30% buy Indian or 50% in buy and make Indian will become more stringent. In fact, instead of 30, we may be requiring 40 to 45% to qualify for this 30%. So some people have got apprehension by Indian. How 30% indigenous content or indigenous item can be by Indian? How it can be? How can we call it when 70% it is imported? Can it be Indian? Isn't it? But to begin with, our base, this also we have issued, or we have deliberated at length. We should be make it 40 or 45 or something. But we thought that to begin with, a lot of integration will take place in the beginning, as General Kochhar has said. Integration will take place, but as we started, like I was in Ministry of Industry that time, 1991, Maruti came. I was allotted a car, even the glasses were imported. So entire thing came and they just assembled here. But you see, 95% or 99% now Maruti is totally indigenous. So it all depends on the volumes. Why we are not able to basically go ahead with the indigenization? There used to be a phased manufacturing program, PMP we used to call in industry that time. You have to keep progressing. And this is how a lot of joint ventures came in the auto sectors. And the whole ecosystem developed. But because the volumes were there. In defense we don't have volumes. Because the armed forces are the only recipient of these products which are whatever manufactured. So we have to at the same time start exporting also. Then only the indigenous content will go up. So first of all, if our industrial base goes up, then this percentage also we may start increasing later on. But we don't want that our nascent industry should suffer in the beginning if we prescribe higher level of indigenization. Then they will be out. Nobody will qualify under buy Indian or buy and make Indian. So that is how first we have made the categorization of this indigenous content definition quite stringent, so that we get better player qualified as buying.
Can I make two suggestions, Mr. Gupta?
Sure.
One is that IC Tech can be made more indigenous content because they are dual use technology. Their market is not only in defense, their market is also in the civil field. So actually you will be supporting Indian industry to sell not only for defense but also in the civil field. Secondly, in the DPP, the timelines that you have given are good timelines. Only thing is adherence. Why can't you mandate by default that if it is not done within the period, let's take it that it is done. Then your this procedural delays will be cut short, immense, and there will be some onus of responsibility on the people who are delaying.
Chair, with your permission, I would like to raise
I
two
think there is a
questions.
very, I think General Kochar has made a point about a separate chapter on ICT. I think it's quite relevant. I mean, so I will have to go and check back why it is not being done so far and what needs to be done further, please.
Sir, Chair, sir, with your permission.
Sir, just a minute, he's asked, he's got the mic.
With your permission, I would like to raise two questions. Congratulations, Mr. Gupta. Despite many lobbying and many other efforts, you have been sustaining on an indigenous approach, and I'm glad to hear that you are talking in terms of value addition. And the example of Maruti cannot be, more support your thinking and your way forward. You made a remark that you have noted down the 4 points of General Subramaniam. I would like to comment on at least, without knowing that whether all the 4 points are
Sir,
there.
may I interject? We got Dr. Agnihotri here, so leave early, so please come to your question. We are not asking for comments, we are asking for questions.
So, when we are talking about one size doesn't fit all in the model, my request would be also on an approach. Now, this is a ground realities and ground experience which I am talking about. We come out with a bid where one element, say for example, is a radio, and the other element in the same bid is something which is related to, say, laptop. Now, if somebody has to really bid, the specialization is generally, not there with an OEM, the one who has got a specialization for a radio and the one who has got specialization for a laptop. It's a very different kind of a combination. And generally, in the process, the OEM loses an opportunity and we bring a middleman or a SI to really go for this kind of a bid. This is a very typical example of approaches based on the models. Second, sir, is about industry. Mr. General Subramaniam referred, and especially on a Buy Indian, we as an industry definitely have vested interest. We are a businessman. But when it comes to a conflict of interest, that is in a committee where someone who's promoting indigenous or an Indian manufacturer has to face somebody who's promoting a foreign equipment. So our request would be not only if we just limit ourselves to industry, but we need to get into committees where the conflict of interests are not there. In the process, they will be in a much better position to propose you a effective way forwards.
Categorization committees, I think industry gets a chance to present their viewpoint in the categorization committees. I think though they may not be the members, but they do present their views before decisions are taken. This is what I know about SCAP CC at the first level.
The first aspect was my approach, that model, if we can really be,
I think
our guideline can be there.
Our DG acquisition is there on the procurement issues, so probably he'll be able to throw light on that because he's a practitioner of procurement, so he's there.
Because
in the current procedures amendment that have been made, make has become your third priority. Where we can make, I don't see any reason why it should be third priority. Buy and make Indian or whatever the other two categories, even there, the criteria should be maximum indigenous content. And that should be weighed. It doesn't, there probably be a cost difference, but maximum indigenous content should be a criteria laid there. Otherwise, we are going to land up in a situation with this 30%. You said very rightly, the volumes are small. And in the world also, ultimately it amounts down to, at best, once you give the order, it is a single vendor situation you are in. And once you are in a single vendor situation, it will be very difficult for technology transfer. We can write as many books as we want on it. There will be no technology transfer. It will remain licensed production by private sector.
This percentage is an evolving criteria. I am not saying that we have basically bound ourselves for the future. I think this issue keeps cropping up again and again, and we are deliberating on that. And every 2 years, the DPP gets modified. So these issues will be looked into.
we have time for one more quick question.
name is Nalin Kohli. I think the DPP, whereas it requires an ICT chapter for the rapid knowledge and high obsolescence, there is also a need for differentiating between very large procurements and small procurements. Now today, whether you do a 5,000 crore procurement or a 5 crore or 10 crore procurement, you end up having the same set of rules. Now, so my request would be if you can look at that. The second thing is there is no provision in the DPP on capturing innovation. So today, by design, it talks of a freezing of a requirement and then giving it to industry for a RFP or a RFI. I would request that, as Jayajit very rightly pointed out, sir, ICT is India's strength, and we have the capability to offer very innovative solutions. So one would be to look at a separate approach for the small projects, and one would be to encourage innovation, which can be a part of it.
See, I can react to only one point. I think I received your suggestions on mail for the MSMEs in the make procedure, so we are incorporating some of them. Okay, thank you.
May I? Just, one point. Just like to amplify on that as far as the procedure for capturing innovation is concerned. Because a lot of innovations are being made, but they are not able to reach their logical applications. In certain defense procurement procedures of certain countries, they have a specific chapter which is dealing only with unsolicited innovations, which do solve problems in the sense that if I am in the army, I know what I need, and there are some people who are able to develop it, but there is no way for it to reach the procurement cycle. So, for example, DPPM of Australia, it caters for innovations that can be absorbed in the whole systems.
I'll just make a small comment here. In the make procedure for the first time, we are introducing there is a provision for innovation, in the sense if any industry, whether in PSU or OFE or private, they come out with some product and they want to get it trial evaluated, then it will be done.
What he is referring to is possibly about Army Technology Board, where they do a lot of paid innovation work, where prototypes are developed and they are tested in the field and accepted and paid for thereafter. Now that prototype cannot get converted into a productionized and introduced item because there is no procedure for that. That must be introduced.
I think exactly you hit the nail on the head.
There is something called Army Technology Board.
Sorry, kind of you got into your position to actually say this. I have actually been discussing along with him because Army Technology Board I have been associated with, and there are very interesting innovative methods which are happening. And that is the only way that the end user is actually connecting with an academia. But an Army Technology Board, and for it to actually become a kind of a production process around here, we have got a kind of a provision within that if it is productionized using the base workshop kind of a model, it is possible for this to happen. Because we have the in-house production capacities which are connected with the services, the base repair depots, the naval dockyards and the base workshops of the Army, from where these methods can actually be done under the delegated financial powers.
Can't be done. IC Tech cannot be done in base workshops.
Definitely not IC Tech. Definitely not IC Tech.
Workshops cannot become production agencies.
Suppose a vendor, with the kind of knowledge the vendor has, comes up with a new product which is not so far on the requirement fabric of the user, but wants to present it to the user for introduction. How would that user, the vendor do it? There has to be a procedure where innovative ideas get.
That is what he just
See, that is what I.
But sir, what would happen is, would the make procedure make it open to all vendors?
See,
Or would it be after an item has been categorized as make, then people start responding to it? There should be a certain amount of proactive presentation of a product by a vendor which is not on the requirements.
See, there are two elements in the make procedure, what we have done for that. If any person wants to make something for the use of the armed forces on his own, he can submit a proposal. That proposal basically will be approved at the highest level, so that later on the same, once he develops the prototype, it can be trial evaluated. But since specifications have not been given and no requirement has been projected from the armed forces, so everything is basically at the risk of the vendor only. There is no commitment of the orders. We will trial evaluate, we will say, yeah, your product as per your specifications is good. But whether RB needs or not, it is off the shelf project now.
Up to that point it is all right.
All right, yes.
The risk is of the vendor.
Correct.
But then tomorrow you will land the same vendor who has come up with the innovative idea into a multi-vendor situation. You will make a QR, throw it open to 10 vendors, they capture the idea that I developed and then make use of it and beat me to it. That's very unfair.
Can they beat you? I mean, just by copying your idea, and you already have got a head start, you have come out with a prototype, it has been trial
But
evaluated.
sir, you will want multi-vendors, so you will wait for other fellows to develop it. You will give them adequate time. Now that is unfair.
I think, okay, so this second point needs deliberations, I
Because
think.
if I have come up, my brains have come up with an innovative idea, something which is very useful to the army. I give the idea and then I suffer. That should not happen. Some kind of safeguard must be covered.
But how do we pick up on single vendor basis? I think that is another
So,
question.
that is one of the problems
Right.
that needs to be addressed. The question that I wanted to
Innovation
ask
is essentially
at
single
the
vendors.
time. The point is that we must learn to bear with certain single vendor situations. That is one of the major stumbling blocks in our procurement procedure.
I think
Because
Okay, then.
that is something that I shall ask after the next.
Okay, I think we'll close the session here. Thank you so very much, all of you fellow panelists. It was really interesting, and thank you audience for asking very relevant questions. We'll have to close the session now because DG Acquisition is waiting very patiently for delivering his talk, and he has to go back to the ministry. Thank you very much.
May I request the chairperson to kindly present a set of clause publications to our eminent panelists. Lieutenant General A.V. Subramaniam. Mr. A.K. Gupta. And Dr. Jayjeet Bhattacharya. I now request Major General Dhruv Katoj to present a memento on behalf of clause to the chairperson, Lieutenant General Kochhar. We now have a special address by Dr. Satish Agnihotri, Director General Acquisition, Ministry of Defence.
These are blind. Still, we can get it.